Wow, I don't know what to think about this one, people. And I'm going to be stumbling over myself because I'm still trying to wrap my head around how something can go so dastardly bad. And I simply couldn't wait for the podcast at cryptotalkradio.net. This was one I needed to put a YouTube video out about because I was so stunned. This was brought to my attention by one of our valued triad members, and this triad member had been in a project in the past, and that's probably how he first heard about it. I suspect, I don't know. But the name, I remember the name, didn't remember where it was from. The name is Don't KYC, at least it was. And initially it didn't click. And then I thought about it. I'm like, wait a minute. This is one of those tokens that you could get as part of EarnHub, which of course crapped and failed. And so then I'm connecting the dots. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's right. With EarnHub, you could stake your stuff in there and you could earn this DKYC. And I didn't know anything about it. I avoided it because the name seemed stupid. And so I'd avoid it. And I moved on, marinated in the cut, minding my own business. EarnHub craps. So I didn't hold it. Triad member says, hey, did you know they rebranded to ShadowFi, which I have here and confirmed. Yes, it did rebrand to ShadowFi. No, I hadn't, but I was curious. So I took a look a little bit deeper. Here's the story around this Don't KYC. Apparently, so it had launched way back. This is roughly around the December timeframe, late November. It had the unreasonable pumps and then it crapped and then it never recovered. Or actually, it looks October or September. So a reasonable pump and then it crapped as usual, which is partly why I remember back then I didn't see anything. So I'm like, okay, there's no value in doing this. And out of sight, out of mind, triad member brings it up, and apparently the ShadowFi comes into place. I do a little bit of digging. Turns out that, yeah, we got this whole thing with the contactless cards and all that good stuff. And so I'm kind of curious, okay, what's going to happen here? And I decided to go a little bit deeper into the site and try to figure out, okay, is this a thing? Is it not a thing? What's really going on here, right? And didn't go any further than that. Then later, I decided to go back into the Medium site. So then the Medium site was absolutely outrageous. I'm telling you right now, if you have not had a chance to check out ShadowFi's Medium site, I am strongly encouraging you do so, especially if you're one of those that loves to be entertained by that which you read. Obviously, there are certain people that don't like reading. I understand that. This is one of those, ladies and gentlemen. I encourage you to get into reading. I strongly recommend you do so, please, because if you saw the thumbnail, that the Medium is where you're going to find some good stuff. Let's set the stage for what's going on with this business, starting with their reasoning that they switched from this Don't KYC into ShadowFi. In summary of this, basically they said, we created this all in good faith and everything sounded good, and we came up with a catchy, quirky name, and then they get a cease and desist letter that says, quote, fraudulent use of the trademark DKYC. Whoever sent it didn't even indicate the reference, by the way. I'll get to that in a second. From a company in Iceland, apparently an attorney firm, allegedly. Quote, we are contacting you on behalf of our client, Deloitte Tax and Consulting, with seat of business in Luxembourg. Our client is the owner of the Benelux trademark registration, DKYC, filed on 5/3/2021, which is probably March, I'm guessing, and registered on 19/6, which is June, basically, of 2021. You'll find enclosed a printout of the corresponding trademark register regarding this registration. We have become aware that you're providing anonymization services regarding the domain name don'tkyc.com. Stop. I want to translate what this is. Number one, the fact that they did not indicate your reference in here, please indicate your reference, means this is a template. That's fine. But the fact that it's a template tells me that this may actually be somewhat phony. The next step I would have taken is to contact and do some due diligence. Allegedly, they did this. They said, Arbitration Mediation Center notified me, quote, that the global giant Deloitte had registered a dispute about our use of the acronym, and in this case, DKYC, and registration of don'tkyc.com. We had unknowingly used their EUIPO trademark acronym, Deloitte Know Your Customer. After several months of back and forth with the WPIPO, Deloitte's legal team have demanded that the panel transfer ownership of don'tkyc.com to Deloitte, quote, even though we have a solid case against their bizarre objections. Now, Stop. So, translation. This came from Deloitte. Deloitte is one of the most reputable firms in the modern world. Bar none, period, point blank. They are a legitimate firm. They're a reputable firm. We're talking billions and billions of dollars worth of money movement. And so they had no chance in this. There's a couple of things, though. The only thing that Deloitte had an issue with was the DKYC specifically. And as a result of using the DKYC as part of the website design, they're saying, we're just going to take this from you because you're using our trademark. So in other words, it's not about the website in of itself. It's the fact that they use that acronym DKYC without understanding or researching that it belonged to Deloitte, know your customer. So then the whole reason this would come up is due to the potential confusion for their customers. It reminds me way back yonder, the WWF, World Wrestling Federation, got into this whole back and forth with the, wildlife, whatever, with the pandas and all this business, and they lost. WWF lost. I don't know why they lost, but they lost. It's a very similar thing. Here, this would have been avoided if they had avoided using the DKYC moniker to describe their token and putting it on the website as their kind of mark without making it unique. So they have a logo that's just the D, and that would have been fine. They should have just gone with that. When you create a cryptocurrency, then, as long as you don't broadcast that as part of, if you're going to use something that's a known or potentially known acronym, that's what could happen. Like if you thought about Apple, you could do Apple today, but if you do APPL as your token and you broadcast it on your site as APPL, you're probably going to get a similar letter on behalf of Apple computers because it is a known mark. And there's an assumption that you would have done research if it's basically it's a non-common term or word. That's why most will use something that's common, right? So let's say drip. Drip is a common word. You can't translate it. However, if it happened to be an acronym that stood for something, you might get a little bit of trouble, AKA SAFU, just saying. Quote, consider that decision date in the context of our liquidity lock-in date, the pending decision, upcoming flex, a reality check into our branding created an incredible opportunity. Two options, quote, pursue don't KYC, as in try to keep it, and fight this big deal, and register some different domain, try to redirect traffic, fighting FUD, and continue struggling and do all this other stuff, or adapt, reinvent, thrive, become top 100. Listen, I'm almost thinking that the car salesman from Seifu is behind this project because the wording of what they're saying sounds like it. Because instead of owning it and saying, you know what, we didn't do due diligence before we picked this freaking moniker, and now we got bitten because we got it wrong because we didn't do the due diligence, we're telling you that we are going to do the right thing this time, and we're going to reinvent and migrate without talking about claims about being top 10 and giving articles like this garbage, talking about what we're doing without explaining the fact that basically got caught with your pants down and a jar of Vaseline nearby. That's what happened, ladies and gentlemen. This was not done out of inspiration or brilliant recognition that we could do something better. This was done because these jerk-offs got caught with their pants down because they didn't do research. I'm not wishing ill of them because at least they took action and recognized the problem. Here's where it got really shady and sketchy though, right? I will always proudly wear Don't KYC as a badge of honor. It's a respectable first iteration. It's our first attempt to challenge governments. They're outdated, gating, spinning. This now sounds like these idiots on Cult DAO. Do you see what I'm saying? Like the way this is written, I was figuring, okay, I'm glad I wasn't in this garbage because knowing what they're doing and understanding they're just in the freaking bubble. These guys are delusional, or ladies are delusional beyond repair. And this is setting them up to failure. Then they announce, you know what? We have this ShadowFi. It's visceral. It tells a story, quote, speaks to private spending away from the floodlight of governance, keeping your information where it needs to be in the shadows, right? Okay, so then they do this broadcast announcement. They say, nope, you're good hands. We're going to make this automatic. We're going to switch your stuff over there. Everything's going to be fine. And we'll just get rid of the D, right? Get the D out, and that's cool. And, you know, we got some new stuff. And part 2 is going to happen. And now we're going to release this business. they gave an announcement across social media that basically said, and you saw it in the thumbnail, we're going to be doing this release and the pre-sale. We're all excited for this lead up. Turns out, and just a caveat, I'm not laughing at people. Other than the devs. I'm talking the investors. I'm not laughing at any of the investors. I'm not laughing at anybody who was in the project. I'm laughing at the sheer irony of what this says. I'll give them credit for at least owning part of it. However, I'm going to call them out for some BS I read in this. This is from their own Medium, so don't call me a futter. They wrote this crap. I'm just reading it. Quote, we were settling in for a beautiful ride, and this was basically a day after the launch. We were settling in for a beautiful ride. Team on point, holders on point, mission refined, and a pre-sale that filled in 4 hours. So based on the shillers and the hype that they were trying to do, they were saying, oh, we're all good. Mind you, all they were focusing on was making as much money as possible, not the fundamentals of doing such a launch. Quote, all this after months of, quote, defending Deloitte's attacks against Don't KYC and then completing a full rebrand under duress at a record pace. So first, you throw pot shots at one of the best companies in the modern era when you're just a lowly crap crypto off in the corner that nobody gives a damn about, and you're going to attack them because you were too stupid to do your research to understand that you were stepping on somebody else's trademark. No, you weren't months defending Deloitte's attacks. What you were doing is trying to figure out if you had a leg to stand on because you didn't do the research in the first place, making you look like an idiot to your investors. Then talking about a, quote, rebrand under duress, which is basically acknowledging you had no plan to actually improve upon what you built because you thought it was good enough until you got caught with your pants down, which I'll get to in a second. Quote, ShadowFi called upon its longtime trusted partner, Avant-Garde, to create not one, but 3 contracts for the token pre-sale and vault in a relatively short time frame. Here's where it gets sketchy. Quote, our contracts were independently audited by InterFi. If you've heard me review any projects, this is on the Binance Smart Chain. I specifically said, I don't rate InterFi. I don't rate hardly any of these. I mostly rate Desert Finance because it feels like they go into more details that you need to know to make sure your project's safe. Quote, and they also had our contracts audited by E-Authority, who I've never heard of. Quote, both audits passed the burn check with flying colors. Not one of the audits identified the exploit. So the first thing this guy does, because again, this didn't tell you anything about a burn, so you don't even know what the heck he's talking about yet. He's already in defense mode. He's already in deflect mode. He's already in, I'm pawning off the blame to these auditors. It ain't my fault, like Silk the Shocker. No, brother, you got this wrong. Start with what you screwed up, not try to deflect blame up front because that makes you look like a clown show. Quote, Avant-Garde and I, so it's an individual, also ran several deploys and ran rigorous tests on testnet. The problem is what you didn't test is your actual event horizon. You didn't test that I could or could not be breached. You didn't test whether somebody could exploit it. You didn't test whether it could be hacked. You didn't test the negative. You tested the positive. You tested that we can launch this effort. We can get that money. We can get the pre-sale. That's what you tested because you were too stupid to think about the possible impacts if there were a breach based on the code that you chose, which I'll get to in a second. Quote, as a side note, when the InterFi audit report was completed, we were dissatisfied with the lack of detail regarding the vault contract. As a result, we pushed out testing another few days and returned the contract for further examination. So let's get this straight. You ostensibly wrote a contract around a vault. This is Avant-Garde when I say you. This is your, quote, longtime trusted partner who built this for you. And yet when you passed it to the auditors, you said, auditor, you didn't go deep enough into this contract. If they're your, quote, longtime trusted partner, why are you skeptical about the audits going into it? Sounds like you don't really trust your partner in the first place. I go on. Quote, the attack on September 1st, 2022. The first phase of the attack on the ShadowFi liquidity pool commenced. Okay. ShadowFi liquidity pool. Then they go through and explain how all these pools work. It's not relevant for the purpose of what I'm covering here today. Quote, this finding of the aftermath, basically the post. What happened? Let's figure it all out. Now you're including CertiK. Imagine that. So you didn't do it up front, but you do it after to figure out what the heck went wrong. So in other words, you chose not to spend the money necessary to get a CertiK audit before you launched the damn thing because you're too busy rushing it out to get that freaking pre-sale money. I know what you were doing. Quote, in phase one, the hacker was exploiting our shadow burst function. At the point the BNB was injected back to the liquidity pool, by utilizing the skim function on the cake liquidity pool contract, the hacker could effectively steal the BNB that was to be reinjected, uses the sync function to keep reserve token values accurate when new currency is sent. Whether from a buyer at liquidity, the sync is called. This I don't have as much of a problem with because it's around the cake liquidity. I don't have as much of a concern on that one specifically. This is one where you'd have to be a really in the know hacker to have exploited that one. However, the only concern I would have is why are you using the cake liquidity pool in the first place? Again, I'm not as concerned, though. It is a problem, but I'm not as concerned about that one. What I'm concerned about is this business here, phase two attack and this solidity business. So basically what happens is, as described, quote, the hacker utilized the burn function. If you've heard me cover projects, I said I don't like to see function mint and I don't like to see function burn if they can be called. And based on the contract, you can tell in situations where I can see they might be executed, thus creating a risk. You've heard me say that, so come on, give my credit. Because now what they're saying is, quote, the hacker utilized the burn function to burn all of the SDF tokens. So this is that liquidity business, resync the price. So it's kind of like this fake out, and then sell 9 of them for a total of over almost 1,100 BNB. That's a lot of freaking money. It came to over $300,000. The 2 attacks appear to have come from secret hackers. Yes, because in this situation, as I said, this phase one was somebody who has inner knowledge of the way that this all worked. And it was just brilliant. It's very similar to what happened to Elephant Money. If you go back to my coverage of that one and what happened with the breach on that business, it's very similar actually in what happened to Elephant Money for the similar reasons. So what he's saying is that the phase one was a different person than the phase two. The reason I'm not worried about phase one is because of the complexity, the level of detail and complexity that happened there. Because of the way that worked, there's not much you could have done because it's not specific to anything they did or didn't do. However, phase two, that's the big one, quote, utilize a custom written smart contract, which is normal, to achieve complete and instant removal all within the same block. Now, do you know why I don't care as much about one versus two? Because with two, they call out, quote, this is the function that caused the damage. It's okay if you can't read code, because he explains what's happening here. This sentence is a Chewbacca. This burn function was designed with ERC standards considered. So basically, you know, I understand that my car freaking blew up. I mean, it's using the mechanics of a car that everybody cars use, not considering about good installation practices, whether it's lubricated, none of that, but just because every car does it. Quote, contrary to comments found on Twitter and Telescam, this function does not need to be only owner. Correct. Why? Because if it's declared in the smart contract, in this case as executable, that means that technically anything can execute it, especially when you're calling public. That's correct. This is correct. So when I see this, I'm like, okay, that's probably a problem. And they say the reason for it was to let our vault contract utilize it for Shadow Strike. Well, this should have been scoped to only whitelist that contract address so that only it could call it. But then they said, quote, to allow future products to utilize it. Why would you do this? And it's because they didn't want to have to tweak the contract. Normally what you do is you have a manageable whitelist that allows you to introduce new contract addresses as you choose, or you do something like ever own. And quote, to allow regular users to utilize it, projects need not prevent a user from deciding to burn their tokens. The problem is that process is normally brokered through a DApp, that the DApp is basically you send those tokens to a burn address, not that they're calling a function to burn the freaking tokens. Anyway, quote, the problem with this function is that the transfer from does not utilize the allowance requirement check. This is where, and I'm trying not to laugh, but look, because our burn function allowed the account address to be passed with the call, it opened the ability for anyone to burn anyone's tokens. Listen, what we're saying is, yeah, Joe, you can go ahead and if you're smart enough, you can call that freaking function and burn everybody else's tokens because blockchain's public. Again, I'm not laughing at the people that got jacked by this. I'm laughing because that's exactly what it says. It's public, so it can be called if you know what the heck you're doing. There's nothing here that scopes it only to a specific account at all. And you are passing the account address in this business. All right, cool. And then transfer from whichever account, send whatever, okay? And then say, yep, we burned whatever, and it's a open function. It's not an inner function. It's not an internal. And it's, yeah, we could just go and do it. So if you know what you're doing, do you understand why this was so shocking to me? Because going back, quote, long time trusted partner Avant-Garde to create this business. So Avant-Garde apparently is to blame for this blatant deal. And at no point in this document does the ShadowFi jokers call out that their quote, long time trusted partner simply screwed the F up. Instead, what they did is they blamed the freaking auditors for not catching it. And then later, although they are the long-time trusted partners, then said, why the heck, auditors, didn't you go deeper into the contract? If you trust your partner, why are you scrutinizing the freaking auditors for not catching what they screwed up on? No, the problem here, dude, is your, quote, long-term trusted partner jacked you, and your trust is likely misplaced, and probably the only reason you trust them is they had the cheapest rate going. You caused this, not the auditors. You caused this. Your partner jacked you. That's what it is. Effing jack move, like the song. That's what happened here, bro. And it doesn't matter that you did tests because you wouldn't have tested for hack risk or breach risk. And as a result, the thumbnail put stuff in quotes. Hack. Do you know why? Because I'm not sold it was a hack. Could it be a hack by definition? Sure, I'm saying I'm not sold that phase 2 was a rando. This guy here, I'm not sold that that was a rando. I'm not sold. Think about this. You can call me tinfoil if you want. Think about this. These guys claim that this partner who created the contracts by their own words is a trusted, long-term trusted partner, and yet they left a function in there. If they're that good at their job, but they leave an open function that anybody can call, don't you find that kind of shady? Don't you find that kind of sketchy? And here's the other concern. Are we saying that the ShadowFi people are so incompetent they don't understand the code that's being handed to them and they just implement it without any internal scrutiny about it? Why are we blindly taking code, number one? Number two, why are we passing the buck to the auditors? Number three, how is it that they're, quote, long-term trusted partner? I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of ages over 18, somebody's lying. And I believe it's ShadowFi. Number one, I don't believe that they are, quote, long-term trusted partner. I don't believe it. I'm not sold. Chances are Avant-Garde had the price they like. Number two, it's possible Avant-Garde may have left that function in there on purpose. I'll let you run with that. Number three, the audit firms chosen are garbage, and I question why you wouldn't have chosen more reputable firms up front before launching it. And the only theory I've got is they were too damn greedy off the pre-sale to build up as much money off the hype that they did off the rebrand for the new version of the site, which did all sorts of crazy stuff, including a countdown to drum up hype around people. My only theory, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm saying it as my theory because it's my show, I'm not sold that this was all just inadvertent. I believe it was inside. Which one of these? I can't say that. I'm saying there's too much stupidity, too much incompetence. I'm not sold. I'm not sold. O.J. Simpson, we're supposed to believe that he took his glove off and dropped it on a bush, a bloody glove. Like, there's certain things where it's like, okay, come on. Now, all that said, if you saw what happened here and you like what this dude or lady said, and you like all this imagery, you like all this hype, you like all that pump, and you don't care that Deloitte, one of the most reputable firms in the modern world, called them garbage only because they used their trademark, which they shouldn't have done, and they were too stupid to do the research to make sure that wasn't going to be the case. And they do this pre-sale, they rush it out the door, and because they rush it out the door, they blatantly overlook a critical gap in the code, which means since they didn't catch it, ShadowFi, that means they're incompetent, don't know how to read code either, and then trusted that the auditors were going to call it out and then screamed at the auditors for not doing more deep research of the code that was written by their, quote, longtime trusted partner. Do you understand why I'm a little bit skeptical that this was just happenstance and why I suspect it was probably an inside job from somebody? Is because nobody's that damn stupid. I'm sorry. If ShadowFi wants to say, you know what, we don't know how to read Solidity code, great. I would counter and say, you shouldn't be making a cryptocurrency then, because if you don't know how to read your own damn code, that means you're launching code and putting your investors at risk. That makes you a bad steward of their finances, and thus you're not cut out for this, brother, is what I'd say to that. Anyway, ShadowFi, formerly known as Don't KYC, and of course, this is probably why you should KYC as opposed to jokes like this garbage. Anyway, if you want to FOMO in, by all means. I don't know if there's anything to FOMO off of because, of course, you know, the price of it went the crapper because somebody took the money because of what I believe is an inside job. Just saying.